Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Rosenfield webinar series. I'm Kathy Delgado. I'm the organizer of this meeting. While we wait on the rest of the attendees to show up, I just want to remind everyone, this is a Q&A webinar, so please feel free to ask any questions using the Q&A chat feature. And yes, with that, I will pass it on to Ken Rosenfield.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. It's actually a lot of fun for me to be here with a good group of friends to work with on a daily basis. And they're all, it's nice to work with such great industry experts. We have here from the legal side and accounting side and the technology side and all that. So it's really great to be with you all. And thanks for hanging with us. I want to introduce Greg Weber. He's our firm's Chief Product Officer and works with us in all of our client-facing products and technology and what we have internally. My dear friend Charles Gallaer, who I've known a long time. He's probably one of the most well-respected automotive attorneys in the nation. Todd Smith, who's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met, and good friend, and luckily lives right around the corner from me too, which is great. So I can always bug him when I need to. And our firm's technology consultant as well, Ikram Massabini. And it's our first webinar we've had with you. So it's a pleasure to work with you guys. And as you all know, the last few months have been very challenging with the CDK attack and what they've gone through. I guess the good thing is that they're probably done with it now. So there's a code of honor, I guess, with these cyber attackers, and they hit you once, they don't hit you again. And so hopefully they're back on track with where they need to be. Accounting perspective, it was very challenging for our clients that were with them. And one of the few things we learned with our clients is still need to always have a great concept and grasp of the basics, how to work a deal, how to prepare orders hand by hand and get things done. And I know it's very challenging for many of our clients on getting just the basic types of forms put together. We're now starting to see, because of that, if they didn't have the skills to do that, some states are imposing fines on not having the title work done on time and things like that. So there is some more backlash coming from that we're seeing. And we have some recommendations. Always do a daily backup that's outside of your EMS system, to have that essential backup there that just you have on the side, so you're not totally reliant on one source for your backups. And our clients that did that, it was much easier to obtain their data. And another thing we recommend is use an external provider to audit your IT systems to make sure that they're working properly and so properly and that type of thing. Your document control, I mean, really have a good idea of how they work, what the end product needs to look at, rather than just relying on your computer screens. So this would be for all aspects of your dealership, from everything from writing a purchase order to a sales invoice to a repair order, parts tickets, and make sure your staff are adequately trained in what the end result needs to be and how things need to look and what the actual process is, instead of relying just on the menu screens of your DMS system. And double check your work too as well. So there was a lot of errors of handwritten documentation. So make sure that you understand what the documents need to look at and what the end result needs to be, and to review your work, because that's something that's fairly novel. Look at continually doing mini audits on your systems for your schedules, your journals, your WIP report, open repair orders, especially cash transactions, and make sure that there's the dates and amounts are accurate. And then it's also look for any adjustments. So adjusting entries, look at those and explore those and make sure that they make sense as well. Without, I don't want to take up too much more time with accounting issues. I want to go straight into what the legal aspects are. I'd like to introduce my dear friend, Charles Gallaer with ArentFox Schiff. Charles, go.
Thanks. Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to come and participate in this panel and speak to everyone today. I started off. Ken and I have known each other for many, many years. I was literally born and raised into the business. My dad was a dealer down in Virginia, and after going to college, I worked for Ford Motor Company. You know, the evil empire, right? But I came back to the good guys, and I worked for my dad for 7+ years before becoming an attorney. One of the first things that I worked on when I got back onto the retail side was coming up with a Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, Safeguards Rule Compliance process for our dealership group. And that was such a novel thing back then, right? I mean, if you think back to those days in the early to mid 2000s, we didn't, and not everybody had smartphones. You had everything that was hardwired into the dealerships. You'd have to go through the DMS, the green, we called them the green screens, back when before CDK it was ADP. And so it was a different world we lived in. And so a lot has changed over that period of time. Everybody really knows about the FTC rule and the FTC Act and the Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the Safeguards rule. All of those things have matured and continue to grow as we have come along. And so a lot of dealers do have those processes in place. If you don't, you really should talk to somebody who can help you assist with coming up with those type of safeguards and making sure that your data is secure and that you're checking all of those boxes and keeping up with what's going on. One of the things that's happened recently, and if you could go to the next slide, Catherine, is that what we're seeing is the different states are coming up with their own requirements regarding data breaches. So it used to be that if you just did whatever it was that the FTC wanted you to do, at least you had a leg to stand on if there was going to be a problem down the road and you actually experienced a breach. Now you actually have to comply with your own state's laws as well that deal with data breach. And I included a couple of examples with New York and Florida because those are states that I predominantly practice in. But ultimately, I think at this point, virtually every state has some type of data breach law that either isn't, in fact, is going to be enacted, is being amended, but you do have to deal with this. So whatever your jurisdiction is, whatever state you're located in, get with somebody who is, can give you competent advice on complying with the different the data security and data breach laws and notification laws in your particular state wherever you operate. Now, while each state might be different, if you're in California, you may have to do something that you don't have to do in New York or Florida or vice versa. What you do see certain characteristics that all of these state laws have. There's normally some type of triggering event that occurs that requires you to then provide notice to your customers. It could be a certain number of customers. I've seen it like in California. I believe it's a 500 customer threshold, and there's certain things that trigger that. So you really look at that on a state by state level and what the trigger requirements are if you do have a breach. You have to have some type of steps in place to rectify it. And then going back to this whole notice requirement, not only do you have to provide notice to whatever the applicable agency is, but you're also having to provide notice to consumers. So if we go back to go in the Wayback Machine, when I first started in this business, and really we were in the infancy of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, that was a completely different bird. That was one set of laws that you had to deal with. Then you had the notice requirements that were under that. Now, not only do you have to be concerned about those notice requirements and how they've changed over time, but also whatever your particular states are. So again, if you do have a breach event, or even just securing your data and understanding what the parameters are and what the universe of your exposure is, you have to be very mindful of whatever your particular states are. And unfortunately, I can't sit there and tell you if you do something in Florida, it's going to work for you in New York. It's really a state by state level. Could you go on to the next slide, Catherine? So why are we here, right? We're talking about CDK. That was a big event, something that most of us had never encountered something like that on the automotive side, where the data was unavailable and you couldn't even access your systems for weeks on end. So a lot of questions that we received at ArentFox from dealers is like, hey, look, you told me that I have to notify when these breaches occur. I got to notify my state. Well, what do I do here, right? Because the problem here was that CDK really wasn't telling anybody what was going on. They weren't saying, hey, we had this data. They weren't being very specific. So honestly, the dealers weren't in a position where they could make a call to their specific states or the FTC and say, hey, we know that this type of breach occurred. that was covered under the law in providing notice. So the CDK, what they have done is they've come in and said, hey, look, we reviewed it. We're not going to give you much detail, but trust us on this. You don't have to notify the FTC. We'll take care of all of that. And if there's a particular state you operate in, we'll take care of that too, depending on what your particular state is. So as it sits right now, and I went on and looked just to update my slides before we came in here today, I'm not aware of any additional information they provided where they're triggering those type of notices and putting those notices out to the different states. But at least at this point, they're taking the position that if there is anything that they need to do, they will take care of that. And on the FTC side, they've gone through and they've reached out to the FTC and they're working with the notice requirements there. So look, it was a big event. A lot of damages happened. Dealers were left without being able to really effectively sell cars and service their customers, and it threw everything into mayhem. So what do you expect happens? Lawsuits, right? That's what people like to do when things happen. So if you could go over to the next slide, Catherine. I've included 4 of them right now, but there's actually, I counted, I think it's 10 or 11 that are pending lawsuits against CDK. All of them are filed in Illinois except for one that's in Florida. I think they chose Illinois because that's where CDK is located, and they're various class actions, right? This is a type of environment where that's where a lot of these plaintiffs are trying to do it, so they're trying to get class certified. And in these different lawsuits, there's some configuration of dealers, body shops, independent repair shops, and consumers that are all making allegations that they received, that they had damages because of this action from CDK. Now, what's a little tricky here is that CDK has, contracts, right? Everybody knows these, and some of their contracts are some of the most onerous contracts that you probably have to sign. So if you do get contacted by these different class action companies, if you're looking at it and you call up your local attorney and you say, hey, I'm really upset about what CDK did to me. What's my recourse? A lot of that's going to depend on what your contract says and what you're entitled to get out of it, because a lot of the CDK contracts we've reviewed have carve-outs for different types of damages, and they really have a very, very narrow scope of what you're able to claim in damages. So I used to have clients that when we would talk about these class actions, they'd look at them like lotto tickets. They say, hey, look, it's like a gamble. I'll throw some money in it, or I'll participate in this class action. We'll see what happens. And some people do that, and that's just what they enjoy doing. But again, if you're thinking about joining one, or you're thinking about taking some type of legal action against CDK yourself, you certainly need to have somebody go through and review what your options are. Look at your contract very, very carefully, because you could find that you don't have all those different options that you thought you had. So with that, we'll answer any questions that come up, but I will hand it over. I think it's to Greg. Am I going to Greg or Ikram?
Charles, I had one comment. We met with a few clients too, and as you're right, your contracts are all different where they're written. But we have a number of clients that are actually in the process of renewing their contracts with CDK. I guess the good thing about the cyber attack is that they probably won't get attacked again. And so some of our clients are looking at whether or not they can use some kind of damage computation or some kind of number they're coming up with to offset the future costs of their contracts or CDK. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be looked at. And I definitely would think that if they're crafting language in these contracts itself and figure out what's better language they have. So I would strongly recommend that an attorney such as yourself look at these contracts much more carefully than they had in the past.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. I mean, I presented it more like an A/B option where you can sue or do nothing. And if I did, that's not really, you have other options, of course. And the fact is that, as Ken had brought up, if you have an opportunity where a renewal is coming up, CDK's just had this horrible thing happen in the news, they're facing all of these different lawsuits. Maybe they're willing to negotiate with you a little bit more than they would have in the past. And so it's just a matter of that could be an avenue where, depending on your clout that you have, depending on how many rooftops you have, the size of your operation, as long as you've been with CDK, there's a lot of business factors that CDK could easily consider to try to do something for your dealership that otherwise they wouldn't do if it's some random person that they've only done business with for a year and it's one store. So that's a great point. All
My
right, with
turn.
that, I'll hand it over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Charles. That was, as law speak goes, that was very interesting. I'm far from a lawyer, so it's nice everybody's here this afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I am Greg Weber, and I'm the Chief Product Officer. My job here at Rosenfield is to try to get the best use of technology. This CDK strike and then Cloud strike definitely highlighted a lot of stuff, and that was the catalyst for this conversation. So with that, Catherine, could you go to the next slide, please? I have thought a lot about this, and I view this whole situation like the butterfly effect. If you've heard of this Chinese proverb, it's the concept that a butterfly can flap their wings, say in the Amazon, and cause a typhoon on the other side of the world. This really nails the CDK and CloudStrike. And it's ironic that today is the 20th of August. CDK, I believe, was on the 19th of June. CloudStrike was on the 19th of July. We've gotten to the 20th of August, and while they say bad things happen in threes, I haven't heard of another disaster as of yet. But we know it's coming, and that's the important thing. The one thing that this did highlight is everybody on this call, whether you're running a dealership or another company, you may believe your IT defenses are adequate, but you were affected by things outside of your control. I mean, you can have all the security in the world and CDK failed, and now you have a problem that you have to react to. CloudStrike was the same thing. It was a different type of outage. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious, but through an error on their side, they took down 8.5 million people. So it just is an opportunity for us all to look within our own organizations and say, what if? What happens to me? I always operate. Another thing that I'm involved with is I'm the executive director of a large event. We always ask ourselves, what's going to go wrong? How do we prepare? Are we prepared? So it's good practice every day to ask your staff, ask yourself, where can we fail? How can we fail? CDK was a huge example where you didn't have access to your CDK system, and you could turn around and say, well, my parts department is okay. They operate on another system. But in reality, the parts department systems were probably integrated to CDK, and they were shut down as quickly as you were. So it was a very tangled web in June. So you want to go to the next slide, Catherine, please? So the key point and takeaway for this is that cybersecurity should never be an afterthought. None of this you should be thinking. We are all thinking about it now because it's happened, and it's very high on our radar. We were talking about this before the call. We're hoping that as this gets further and further in the rearview mirror, that people don't start to discount it. I think it was Charles that reminded me of during the pandemic. There were supply chain problems. People learned how to operate out of those. And now that those have resolved, they've thrown those things out to the wayside and are back to business as usual. So hoping you are not attacked is not a plan. Hoping your vendors are not attacked is not a plan. You got to try to think what you're going to do in those situations. And the best thing is preparation. Like at your home, you have smoke detectors, you have fire extinguishers. My suggestion would be the first step is to create a WISP if you don't have one, a written internet security plan. Some people have SOC 2s, they have other certifications, but having a plan written down is a great first step. Now, if you're the leader of a dealership, probably not in your job description to write this, but you can challenge your own staff and say, what is our plan? Do we have it written down? How are we going to react? There's nothing wrong if you haven't asked those questions to start asking them. And Ikram's going to speak at the end. Ikram is a company we just engaged at Rosenfield. They are validating our defenses, and they can come in and validate your defenses just as well. They're not going to take over your IT, but they can certainly come in and stress test it and make suggestions as to where they see vulnerability. So, okay, can we move on? And if anybody has any questions along the way, chime in. I'm sure anybody on this panel can step in. Todd's sitting there being very quiet.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to share a comment from Peter Legger. I'm sorry if I said that. It's a comment. Empirical data indicates that 30+% of ransomware demands repeat. The automotive retail industry is still highly vulnerable, especially DNS providers and software providers. And it says past president of ADP Dealer Services. I believe that's you, Peter. Thank you for your comment. Moving on to the next slide.
So I just touched on this. A WISP really gets to how you're going to react. What are you doing to prepare? You may have done this 8 or 9 years ago, and Ikram will issue a score when they rate your networks. And not to be promotional, but to be promotional, it was very cost effective. I've been in computers since punch cards, and this was never a problem. The biggest problem you had was you dropped your punch cards and had to reorganize them. Initially, 10, 15 years ago, you would do things called penetration tests. They were $25,000, $30,000. Like everything, these prices have come down through the course of time, and they've gotten better and more sophisticated. Ikram works every day to keep his staff up to date, to try to stay up with the cyber people. So it's a good idea. Retest what you've done years ago. Make sure you're staying up to date. So, okay. Catherine? So, key components. I wanted to touch on this briefly just to give people an oversight. Identify your risks. Where are your potential vulnerabilities? We all lock the door at night, most of us, when we go out the door. How can people get in? Is your risk that your parts software is tied to 4 other systems and they're going to fail? Figure out what your security controls are. You probably have monitoring. People have, with the advent of technology coming down in price, I know many dealers that are putting, high-def cameras in their parking lots. They can identify accidents in the lot when the lot person backs into somebody and says they didn't do it, or a client did it. And then how are you going to respond to these things? Like if there is a breach, who are you going to call? Do you have all of that stuff at your fingertips? Are your attorneys on speed dial? Does your staff know who to call? And then always train your employees. I mean, I think every business now is probably undergoing phishing attacks with their email, but training, you can never train enough. This is a constant changing landscape. And then what is your business continuity plan if you fail? I mean, everything has gotten better. When Ikram tested us, we scored 1 level within the test, and he believes he's going to raise us up another 30 or 40%. But we believe we were already at that level from years ago. So we want to go back to those testings. We want to look at our continuity plan and say, how are we going to continue in an outage? And the benefits of a WISP are obvious. You can sleep better at night. If there is a breach, you've already potentially saved money. You're basically buying insurance and adding protection to your business, which everybody should be doing on a daily basis. Catherine? This is one I believe in a lot. It's validate what you believe or what you're being told. We rely on a lot of companies. If Ikram is providing service to us as our MSP, I will validate what he is telling me a year from now so that we know as a business we are confident of the services we are getting. It's not unlike sending out an RFP for somebody who's providing a service to your business. So if your IT staff is telling you you're protected, challenge them, test them, find an independent MSP to come in and validate. Ikram will go through the benefits of what his company is able to do, but Ikram's not the only one out there doing it. So I encourage people, always validate what you're told. Know with confidence that you're being told something truthful. And to defend your own IT staffs, they may believe they're 100% protected until somebody finds a hole. And that's what the cyber criminals are doing. Next. So with that, I'm going to punt to Ikram and how companies like his can help you be more fortified against these constant threats that are coming.
Well, thanks a lot, Greg. I hope you guys can hear me well. My name is Ikram Massabini. I'm the owner and CEO of MVP Network Consulting. We're out of Buffalo, New York. We have a location right outside of New York City, and we've been open for 22 years. We focus on IT and cybersecurity, two different sides of the brain, if you will. I feel like cybersecurity is really about testing what you have and what IT is doing. So IT aside, I'm going to focus on FTC regulations. I'm going to make it very educational as much as possible. And I'm going to give you some elements and overviews that you could do now to help protect your environment. And then at the end, I'll talk about a third-party analysis. And that's what I'm here to talk about, is to test not only test your network, but also to make sure your IT people have covered everything that they need to cover. So having said that, I can't control the slides, though, Catherine, if you don't mind moving me forward. So as you guys know, FTC has released new guidelines for auto dealerships. And in reality, those are new guidelines. They're a framework, but really a framework taken from the NIST 800-171. It's been around for a while and what to look for, but it's finally coming into the auto dealership arena, if you will. Let's move forward. So we put in some summary of the new guidelines. So from a CARS rule, and this is not just cybersecurity, this is overall some of the guidelines that they have. Truth in advertising. You can't be deceptive. Clear pricing, obvious. Require dealership to disclose the offering price. No mandatory add-ons, so dealers can't charge consumers for optional products. You guys know that already. And the used cars, they add mandatory disclosures where dealer must provide a buyer's guide with information about the vehicle's condition. And then warranty requirements, clear and accessible warranty information must be provided. This is from a high level what the FTC was trying to look at and see what they could do to better not only the consumer and protect the consumer, but also protect the dealer. Let's move forward. So some privacy rules that they looked at were consumer information protection. So dealer handling financial information must notify customers about data collection, sharing, and protection practices. They're asking you to let the consumer know who's going to have access to their data. And they're holding you responsible for that data that you're collecting from the consumer. So security number, demographic information, all the information that you're getting, you're responsible for that security of it. If it's on your network, you're responsible for it. Even if you're using another provider like CDK, they want you to sign a business associate agreement with them, holding them responsible for the level that you want that your security to be handled. And what the framework, which is really the NIST 800-171, is saying. So other important regulation, Truth in Lending Act, disclose credit term clearly, Equal Credit Opportunity Act has been around, but they prohibit discrimination in lending. And in essence, the FTC guidelines aim to promote transparency, fairness, and consumer protection in the automotive industry. So that's from a high level, but let's get deeper a little bit. Let's move forward. I want you to remember one thing, that cybersecurity is not just about filling out the form that you receive from your insurance company or from the FTC, or it's not just about filling out an Excel spreadsheet. It's about really protecting the dealership and its clients' data. That's what we're coming down to. It's not just about, oh, well, I'm required to fill this out. I have to do this. Well, yes, you do, but you also have to do what's in it, and you have to understand why. At the end of the day, if you step back, you can continue operation even in the event of the breach. Do you have a business disaster recovery plan? Can you work on paper? What happens if you're down? What happens if you got hacked? You personally, your network. How secure is your network? How open is your network? The idea is to always be available for your clients. But it's not just to fill out a form. So let's move forward. Because a lot of time people call us, dealers call us and say, well, I'm looking for cyber insurance and they want me to fill out this form. My IT person says, I'm good, just fill it out for me. Well, no, we have to really look at what you have and really do our due diligence. So I put together 9 elements to implement. And this is something that you guys could do right away and look internally to see if you have those done. Number 1, and this is from the FTC rules as well. So I kind of lined them up to let you know what they are asking you to do. 1 is designated qualified individual. You know, what does that mean? That means basically you identify one person internally that will be responsible for your security. They don't have to be an IT person, right? They just have to understand, and they don't even have to be part of the organization, but they have to, and they have to be qualified enough to understand where the risks are, what tools you use, and where is the data. And then they have to work with people to let them know how it's secure. They're responsible for compliance, basically, and hold the people they're working with responsible. And then you have to perform and document a risk assessment. They want you to run a full risk assessment, determine the risk criteria, assessment of existing controls, determine how risk will be mitigated or accepted if there is a risk, because some people may say, well, I don't want all these tools. I'm okay with that risk because I have this backup or I have this plan. Just as long as it's documented and you understand what needs to go into it. This is not a one and done. It's a periodic assessment that will be necessary to do on a regular basis to be able to see if things change, because technology change. You have patch updates, you have Microsoft releases new versions, and guess what? They cause vulnerabilities and they cause issues and other things. So it's an ongoing assessment that needs to be done. And then after you do the assessment, you have to apply those controls. You'll see holes. And then how do you fix them? So you authorize access control, encryption for customer information. Do you have that? Multi-factor authentication. Make sure that you don't log in with just your password, that you have a code that comes in that stops hackers from being able to use weak vulnerabilities and weak security. Data disposal, change management procedure. I used to do it this way. Now I do it that way. And it's documented. Logging and monitoring controls of what's happening on your network. These controls need to be applied to your environment. Then you have to validate those controls. And what I mean by validate is make sure that they're actually working. Make sure that what you put in place is working for your dealership from a physical, technical, and administrative controls. All 3 of them have to be looked at. You got to test and monitor control efficiency, perform continuous monitoring, and do a pen and vulnerability scans. A pen is penetration testing. Try to hack you from outside. Most hacks, they'll happen because somebody clicked on something they're not supposed to click. And then what? What happens then? And I'll talk about that a little in the next slide. Next is develop a training and auditing program. People don't know what they're supposed to click on. Security awareness training is very important. 90% of all hacks happen because of a phishing email that somebody received. It may be coming from your CEO. It may be coming from somebody you know because their account got hacked. So if you do enough training, they'll know what to look for. Maintain sufficient staffing for security program and ensure a continuous education for your people. And that should be part of any security program that you're implementing. And then monitor service provider. Engage capable service providers. Know that they're actually adhering to the controls. Have them give you their disaster recovery plan. What will happen if they're down? Because it's affecting you. This is part of what your security qualified individual needs to be doing, right? And obviously, working with somebody that does this for a living, we can help and guide and show you what needs to happen, create a WISP for you, and actually go through all those the things that you need to develop. And then have a continuous improving cadence. In other words, have a meeting on a regular basis that scans, that develops, reevaluate your security plan alongside business changes, review risk assessment and adjust control accordingly. Have a regular meeting to say, all right, what happened now? What is the new risk? Did we run a new vulnerability assessment? That should be done monthly. Where are the holes? How can we patch them? And then document that incident response plan. In other words, you should know what happens. You should know how it happened, and you should have a plan to adhere to making sure that it's documented and you know what to do the next time something happens so it doesn't happen again. And the only thing I'd say is, yes, most hackers, because it's a business development, it's their business model, is that if I hack you, I'm going to actually give you the right tool to decrypt your data because I want you to tell other people I paid the ransom and I was able to get my data back. That's their business model. However, that doesn't mean they're not going to hack you again. It means that for the first time, they may have given you the key. Well, if you didn't block the door and where they came in the first time, well, guess what? They're going to jump through that window or through that door again. They're going to walk right through it. We have a client that called us after they got 3 ransomware attacks 1 month apart. They called us at the end, because their IT person said, I had it. Let's just pay the ransom. A month later, the IT didn't stop the issue. The IT guy they had didn't stop the issue that they have. The door was still wide open. That same hacker came back in. And so it's things that you need to be aware of, and then provide an annual reporting to senior leadership so they know exactly what they're doing. I hope this was helpful. 9 elements from what FTC is kind of requiring across the board to do, which is a lot to do. So let's move on, if you don't mind, Catherine.
Ikram, we actually have a question from Peter. It's for the panel members, but I think this has a lot to do with what we were just discussing. He says, bringing your own device is very prevalent among employees, such as sales, F&L service at dealerships, and protection of consumer NPI is totally at risk. What is the panel perspective on how dealers need to be proactive in this vulnerable area?
I can start with this if somebody else wants to jump in after, but bring your own device as part of IT. It should be allowed, but if anything is going to be connected to your network, it needs to have your security tools implemented on it. If you're going to allow somebody to jump into your network and be able to get your data and read it on their home machine, make sure their home machine and their home network is secured so that they don't cause issues. A lot of time, you may even install your tools on one machine, but they're connecting from their home network, and their kid is also have their own machine, and they're downloading stuff and doing other things that may cause them to jump from their machine to your machine to back to your network. So yeah, it's doable, but it has to be done with the right tools. Anybody else wants to add anything for Peter?
Ikram, I think touching on DLP protection too might be a good point here.
Sure. So there's a tool called DLP, data loss prevention. This is also done for your internal threats, not only external. So what it does is it listens to every event. If you try to copy a social security number and paste it somewhere, it will stop you from doing that. There are certain guidelines. They won't allow you to do certain things. They won't allow you to do a screenshot. It won't allow you to email data that's not supposed to go outside your environment. It will stop you. It will pop up. It will say, this is not allowed. And then you may require, and you may say, no, I really need to do this. So you could have exceptions, obviously, and a manager has to approve it. So that way there is that second layer of protection. But DLP is data loss prevention, and it's the idea to look at every piece of data that every employee is working on and to stop them from being able to share it, whether being maliciously taking it out with them, like a client list, and they're going to another dealership, whatever it may be. It will stop them from being able to do any of that. It secures your environment and doesn't allow anybody to take data out, down to including if you want to they want to copy your files onto a USB drive. If they take that USB drive outside your environment, they won't be able to open those files outside.
These are all great points that Ikram and Greg brought up too. And just to chime in on what I've seen some of our clients do, is that you can, going back to that whole the bring your own device question, you can actually set up, there's various software tools that you can do it, where you're basically creating a sandbox on the employee's phone that has certain apps that are allowed that, work, I'll call them like the work apps, and that those are like, if, for example, if they're using, getting emails, it should be to an email that your dealership provides, right? Not their personal emails. Then once it goes through that, it's now living on this app that your IT people can then watch what's going on. They can shut off if an employee leaves, and then there's a lot of restrictions in place between like Ikram was saying, where you take the screenshot, you can't take the screenshot, or if you try to transfer, like let's say you get an email and you're trying to transfer it to the employee's personal Adobe app that they have on their phone, they can't do it. So there's a lot of really creative solutions out there that that if you have these type of and they're all good concerns to address, and you really should keep that in mind, because not only is it just from a security standpoint and locking that down so you don't have a data breach, it also makes it a little bit harder for the real life, whereas an employee creates like their own little database of your files and then they leave, right? So there's a lot of really good benefits on why it's a best practice to do that type of data security, even if it means getting that software on the employee's phone and monitoring it.
Great point. I appreciate that, Charles. But that's exactly right. Now, what's your level of risk, right? What are you willing to live with? That's where the question becomes, because you could secure it to the nth degree, but at the end of the day, some people may say, well, I don't have much. I'm working only with this one dealer. So it's a SaaS provider. So in other words, the application's in the cloud. I'm not responsible for it. But you are, because the data that you're putting in there is data that somebody gave you. You're responsible for that. You have to hold them accountable. So I hope that helps. Let's go to the next slide. I think that will give us some understanding here. So once you implement what they want, what's the consequences of not doing that? Fines, from 10,000 to 100,000 per violation. It's a wide regulatory discretion on amounts, and it's really depending on what you have in place versus what you don't. So we said, I'm an auditor, and I sit with other people, with the people that are getting audited, and there's going to be a fine, and I go through it. And when we go through it, we see, all right, what did you put in place? Were you negligent? In other words, you left it wide open and you didn't care, and now you're hacked. Well, guess what? Your fine is going to be a lot higher. Were you not negligent? Were you doing vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, but still something came through? Well, then your fine is going to be a lot less. Just be prepared that what effort you put in gets looked at if there is an issue. And all it takes is one issue. All it takes is one accident. So it's just be aware of that. Gross breach can result in up to 5 years in prison. In other words, I knew I had a wide open network, didn't do anything about it, didn't care. Well, if you cause people harm because somebody now stole their identity and now is using their credit, you may be liable to go to jail. And that's part of the new FTC regulation and enforced by the FTC and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Let's go to the next one. That's the consequences. But how are they going to do that? That's the question here, right? I mean, there's a lot of dealers and there isn't that many people in the FTC. So how they're going to do it is reactive, not proactive. You're going to have an issue. They're going to come and take a look at you with a microscope. The regulators examine you under a microscope. Then they will give you a fine. They're going to come in after the fact. You're down now. You have to let people know. You can't operate. Now you have to do something about it. Then you're going to get audited, and you're going to wish you did everything else up front. So what I'm saying is, let's make sure that we're being proactive and not wait for it. So this is how these compliances across the board, actually, not just the FTC. We work a lot with HIPAA and other bodies, government bodies, and they do it the same way. They wait for an issue to happen, then they come in and fine you. Welcome to government. So let's move on to the next one. So what can you do about that?
We actually have another question. Oh,
sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, Ikram. We have another question actually about the FTC safeguards rule, since they passed the enforcement date in June 9th of 2023. Yep. It's estimated that 55% of dealers are attempting to become compliant, but less than 30 are fully compliant. Will this catastrophic CDK cyber attack change the dealer's cybersecurity posture? What do you guys think of that?
I mean, I would say yes, it has to change, because if you don't change with it, you put yourself at risk, your dealership at risk, your clients at risk, most importantly. Anybody else wants to add anything to that?
I hope it changes. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if this doesn't, this should have been this is a wake up call, right? I mean, it's you have it where it's CDK, and I know we'll have other people that may come in and address really that CDK's data isn't quite production isn't quite where it needs to be. But the fact is, if this doesn't wake you up and show you as a dealer, and you want to do this anyway, right? Because these are your customers. These are customers that are entrusting you each and every day, providing their information to you, right? They're giving you their information to do business with you. You don't want to be the guy that's on TV, Action 12 News, where you're getting perp walked by your state AG or the FTC talking about how you let all of these customers, the little Sally that lives down the street and now she's a pensioner and she lost everything because her data was stolen. You don't want that. It's a best business practice to do it. We shouldn't have had it where you had the CDK attack to wake people up. But if that didn't wake you up, you got to wake up. I mean, that's. I really hope that if there's anybody, I'm taking it that you're on this call. Probably we're preaching to the choir, maybe to some extent. But if you ever had any doubt in your mind and saying, "Hey, is this really worth it to do all this?" You really got to see what the here and now is and take the right steps to get everything right.
Yeah, I think automotive in general has been far more reactive to these types of things than proactive, and most likely it will take FTC fines hitting more mainstream dealers that dealers finally start to look at security as a major priority. Because if you break down our industry in general, if we go into any store, anyone in the audience's store, pull up salespeople's individual phones, we'll find PII, copies of driver's license, insurance card, W-2s, proof of roofs, take your pick. All of those things are a problem. We know it. It still is happening every single day. And I think until, the government starts fining you, then at that point, dealers will take this extremely seriously. The new Cars Act, what if all of it or a piece of it passes, also will change a lot of things, like just storing all the transactional history for 2 years. In the current architectural structure of dealerships and how cars are sold, that's really not possible. You could have correspondence coming from individual salespeople's devices to customers, some stuff coming from the CRM, other correspondence going through third-party applications that the dealer is using, website applications, all these things, and how that's going to get correlated and stored in a usable file that could be presented under an audit is something we just haven't seen yet. And I think there's definitely a few items that, dealers should start. You don't have to look all the way around the corner to see a few things that could easily be tackled up front. One is just get the PII off your people's devices. Stop printing as documents, driver's license, photocopying. Anything you want to store digitally and secure it is going to be the best route moving forward. That's what we see every single day, because if you walk into stores, yes, you find documents on people's phones, but you also find PII just in plain sight. That's in a folder, deal folder, copy of a driver's license, copy of that insurance card, something with PII. Those are what dealers can fix today to make de-risk the business without even doing a lot. To me, those are those first steps into a world that unfortunately is just going to be much more compliant driven.
Align, well said.
Yeah, very well said.
I would add to that, Todd. You talk about copies, and something a lot of people don't even think about. And it's changed over the course of the last few years. But when you make a copy of something, it used to be 9 times out of 10 it was stored on a hard drive in the copy machine, and then the copy machine gets decommissioned and it gets sent somewhere, China, and all that PII has been delivered to them in a nice little box. So they don't even have to go and get those documents. But clean desk policies, all of that stuff, low-hanging fruit. That goes to starting to look around and say, what can we do today? I mean, all of this is very overwhelming about how exposed people can be. I think it's, you can't eat the elephant in one bite. You got to take it in little pieces. So the best time to start is now. I mean, what is the other proverb? When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago or today? Today's the best time. Take a walk around your dealership. Take a walk around your business and see how much PII is just sitting on the desks.
So my favorites of this are, I find taped to the bottom of the keyboard, passcodes, the right or left drawer, and there's a notepad with all the passwords, username and passwords. I find sticky notes on computer monitors, mostly on the service drive with passwords. So, as Greg points out, yes, obviously, there's a lot of exposure points, and realize that 60% of fraud starts internally. So yes, obviously we're here to talk about CDK and the external hack, and CDK, an enormous size it was, had lots of vulnerabilities. They bought lots of technology over time. They're a monolithic tech stack. They're not completely integrated. So they probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerability points, just like any of these other big companies that have been around a long time in our industry. So, but one of the things that holds true, I think, to this day, when you think about your business right now, when you walk into it, can you plug in and download a list from your CRM? If you can do that, and a manager's not notified or it doesn't stop you from doing that, that's a problem. That's a vulnerability risk. That should be shut off. Those are those little things you can do, preventing PII to slip out of the dealership's hands into a bad actor, whether it was an employee, previous employee who still has access. We see that a ton. I mean, I always think dealers should at least audit about once a month all your vendors, who you're still paying, and still who has access to your systems. Because it's not uncommon to go in groups all the time where they're still paying, or they stopped paying, but another vendor has access to that data still to this date, and they hadn't been a client in 6 months or a year. They just never shut off the feed. And because of those little things, they're all vulnerability holes in your system. And that's easy to do. That's not going all the way down the pen testing and doing the extreme things. It's like, these are my vendors. Who are we currently using? Who has access? And what data are they taking? I need to know that. Once you know that, then you can kind of make a little bit easier decisions of who gets what and where and when.
And to Todd's point, with these systems, and I feel bad, CDK is certainly under the microscope here, but any other DMS provider, which will go unnamed, I mean, you skirted a bullet, right? You didn't get what CDK is, but you are just as vulnerable as what CDK went through. And you should be challenging those same things. And I would, you look at it, and some of these systems are older, right? We know they're older. So there have been a lot of workarounds provided. So whether your sales manager is downloading a spreadsheet to take it with them, or they're downloading it to populate some other spreadsheet you created to run the business, all of that stuff has to be gotten under control. Some of it is intentional. It's not nefarious. So, or it's to run the business. You don't want to stop your business. You just have to be prudent about the way it's being run.
Yeah, to me, it's just putting a guard check. That's all. What data's moving out to a sales manager, fine. How he captured 500 customer records because it's going to a marketing company to do a direct mail piece for an oil change. Okay, you just need to see that tracking, because if something comes back, you're going to, and FTC or some agency comes in, it's going to run an audit against you. You're going to want to know exactly where the data went and who took that data, and ultimately what was done with it. I think we loosely play with data in auto, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that's going to need to change. that data has to be secured. Your customers are the most valuable asset in a dealership. And I think we always looked at that from the business, saying, oh, my customers are the most valuable asset, not the building, not the logo. It's my customers who do business with me. But from the outside perspective, the fraudsters, yes, your customers are the absolute most valuable, and they want access to that data because that data can be used against you. It can be used like in CDK's instance where they had to pay whatever the fine was, $25 million or whatever in Bitcoin. It's very interesting. I think we'll see more of this. I saw Finley Automotive, multiple groups have been hacked in the last few months. I see we have a lot of vulnerability that we need to still figure out.
Aligned. Can we go one more slide up? Just because we're coming up to the hour. This is what we're offering as MVP, is a third-party assessment. What we do is test your security. And the way that we do it, since we know that most hacks happen because of a click that you're not supposed to click on or something that happened inadvertently, we test it that way. We send you a link. The link is a malicious link, but that we control. It's not going to cause any issues, but it will cause havoc. Hopefully, your IT providers will be able to stop any scans from happening. But if they're not able to, the scan is going to run, try to crack your password, try to see any PII available on your network, on your machine. Can it jump from your machine to other machines on the network? How can it mine information and data out of those machines? Can it reach your servers? Can it get data out of that? What kind of data is it going to get? What kind of vulnerabilities do you have on your network? We're going to send a malicious payload through your firewall. Did your firewall stop it? All the things that we would run as a scan and provide you with a report so that you know where your holes are. And then help your IT provider patch those holes, letting them know where we found it, how we were able to get access. I mean, we go all the way down to putting a file on somebody's desktop to prove a point that, hey, you're wide open. All you did is click on one link I sent you, and then I'm able to get all this data out of it. Let's close the doors, right? I think of a network as a building, and every building has rooms in it, and you have a window and a door. You want to make sure that if your window's open, somebody jumps through it, the door is locked so they can't run down the hallway and go from one room to the other all the way down to your main area in the building. You want to make sure that you isolate the risks and you know where the vulnerabilities are. Nothing can be 100%, but if we do the due diligence, at least you won't be the low-hanging fruits, because hackers are lazy too. And if you're wide open, if you're hard, they're not going to sit there and try to hack you unless you're CDK and you're going to give them millions of dollars. But as a dealership, your job is just to be secured enough and to know where your vulnerabilities are and you know what to do about them. And we could work with your IT provider to let them know where the holes are, because we're cybersecurity expert. That's the only thing. That's what we focus on in here. So we're offering what I call a total watch. It's a third-party assessment. It will do vulnerability analysis, penetration tests, supply chain analysis, insider threats, firewall testing, Active Directory evaluation. We'll do a stand-up tabletop exercise. What happens if the system is down? Not what are we going to do next? And we're going to help you document all that. So the idea is to give you enough info and to secure your network at a higher level and to help you achieve compliancy with the FTC.
And I'll just add that with Ikram's tests, I mean, they can certainly be done in collaboration with your MSP or your IT staff, but they can also be done without the collaboration and with your own knowledge as a dealer principal or the owner of the business. And you work with Ikram or another provider and take the link, run it, and see what your network protection finds. He shouldn't be able to get very far, right? And if he runs rampant in the network and he can get all the data and your company doesn't alert you, you know you have a problem, a big problem. So just food for thought, something to think about. And going back to Todd, you can start today by just getting those scans off the desks, right? There's easy stuff. You don't have to be overwhelmed. There's stuff you can do every day to make things more secure and make things better, like locking the door.
Yeah, and it's like when you go to your IT provider, say, how secure are we? I mean, the answer is always very secure. We have this in place, we have that. I'd like to add this additional tool, but this is what it does. But at the end, the idea of our scan is to be a third party, an outside, to act as a hacker, to try to break through and see what the tools that you have in place will be able to do. Are they able to stop us? Are we able to mine you? Am I able to crack all your passwords and tell you what your password for your bank account is and log in on your behalf? Am I able to get all your social security numbers that you have on your system? Am I able to scan and find your W-2s, employee information? What am I able to mine? I'm saying this stuff because this is stuff we find all the time. And it doesn't take long to find. Our test altogether is a 15-minute test, but then the results come 3 days after. And we come through and sit and show you the findings, the vulnerabilities, and what you could do about it.
Yeah, I think that building on that, I think the world we're heading to, everything, all data, what's called in flight, so whether it's through messaging or moving between systems, should be encrypted, and all data at rest should be encrypted. That it is sitting in files that have easy access, that's going to end. And this is the change in architecture that we're seeing around just security in general, versus what is kind of more traditional in automotive. And I think we're moving to this period of time where we're going to get to what we call a zero trust environment, meaning right now we have these things called firewalls that kind of, but once you pierce the firewall, you can kind of get free range inside a system. But zero trust environments don't give you access to a whole system. You only get access to little pieces of a system. And if everything is encrypted, it very little can be gotten from those systems. So a good example of that would be like Intuit. Intuit's design and data architecture. This is why you don't see too much, no one's hacked their system. And even if it is hacked, there's no mass data breach because of how they're architecturally designed. We're going to see more of that. Try to push off the advancements in hacking. But also to counter this, just as AI is helping us create better systems, as Ikram was telling you about, you're probably using AI, you can use it for pen testing, you can use it for a lot of things. The hackers are using these same tools and applications against us, all the way down to voice cloning. Like I think in the latest automotive news, one of the top guys at Ferrari, the CEO of Ferrari's voice was cloned and used to try to get one of the VPs to issue some money wire, and ultimately exposed. But he had enough mental sense that on the call with not the real CEO, he asked a question that only the real CEO would know about, a book that CEO gave him, and then the call ended. And this goes to show where we're heading with the ability of AI. And just as we're fighting for good, just realize there is going to be a segment of this market that's going to fight to go aggressively go bad. The CDK hack should only bring to light that, yeah, it was hacked. How many of your dealerships got a phishing scam from a posing as a CDK rep right afterwards? So as soon as they see vulnerability, the hackers will attack it and they'll go all in. And as soon as they know there's money there, they'll go all in. So this is a good time, probably over the balance of this next, 5 months before, 6 months before the end of the year, dealers should really start to lay out a strong plan to go into 25, that they're really taking security and compliance up a notch to protect their business.
Okay. Our next slide.
Well said, Todd. Way to end it there. It was good.
We do have one more question for Ikram. What is the cost of the total watch assessment?
Okay, well, it depends. We offer in 2 different ways. One is an ongoing program, monthly, where we run the assessment regularly, sit with your IT staff, and to have a regular cadence. And one It's just a one-time assessment that we provide that info for you. We give special pricing to Rosenfield and Greg, and they'll be able to share that with everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share everyone's contact info here as well. And if you have any additional questions, just put them in the Q&A chat. We can answer them now, or we can get you an answer later as well.
Well, thanks for this opportunity, everybody, and let's stay safe out there. And for everybody that joined, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I concur. Thank you.
Yeah, and as far as pricing, the folks at Rosenfield will be able to let you know. If you're interested, by all means, reach out to them and they'll get a hold of us. All right.